Hello, and today I'm going to talk about a couple of interesting things. So, a bit of a whistle stop tour here. So, the idea is I'm just looking at doing compilation and trying to make things and try to be efficient in Linux because I have come from a Windows background. And so, when I started a couple of weeks ago, it was a bit painful because I do not know anything, or I didn't know anything, but now I do. And so I thought I'd take this opportunity to share what I know. So we're going to start with this cross-platform development side, and the first thing we're going to talk about is adding a repo. So repo stands for repository, and each different Linux distribution, that's operating system, versions of our operating system. For example, you've got Windows 10, Windows XP, Windows whatever, and from now it's Windows 10 forever, and now they just add and remove things, which is how it should have been, how they moved and migrated from a Windows 10 based rewrites all the time to just like Linux, where they replaced bits and pieces. So at the moment I'm doing this on CentOS here, and I'm replacing the Apple release. So that's Red Hat Linux. So I'm pulling from the list of software updates that I can on there. The problems with using Linux is when a big company buys a particular release, then they tend to buy the users, and as a result, they will try and monetize it at some point. So CentOS 8 is the last release, and then I'll have to go to SUSE or Ubuntu. So that's what we have here. Where do I get the software from? First, I must run as admin, so I log on as root, and then this line says, where do I go in particular to find some software? There's lots of different repos for different purposes and different architectures. So a PC is x86-64, so that's 32-bit and 64-bit processors. And basically Windows and Linux. There's other architectures as well, so depending on what you're buying, you'll have to select a different repo that makes sense. And you'll find that whenever you're installing whatever software that you're installing. As with Windows updates, we have DNF upgrade Y, so whenever you get prompted, upgrade all the packages so you can go make a cup of tea and come back, and then wonderful, it comes back. We'll be going on to scripting soon and see what the next one is. So as part of this process, it's important to be able to install software. So instead of having add and remove programs, for example, in Windows, you have Snap. And so we install Snap using Yum. It's another package installer, just like DNF. So they shifted, I think, from DNF to Yum or the other way around. So you then have the ability to install packages, but it doesn't cover everything. It only covers the base operating system, not the applications like Word or whatever the case. And being Linux, there's lots of free open source stuff that's out there that's pretty good, and there's some rubbish out there, just like there would be in the Windows world. We have the equivalent of a link, a shortcut in Windows, which is a symbolic link here, symbolic link from here, source to the destination. So when you do snap, then we'll be able to run this that we've installed, which is our way of installing applications. Then I installed what's called a dynamic kernel module. So this is allowing me to replace bits of the kernel. Kernel is think of it like a processor for the operating system. Parts of it will be can be switched out. You'll have a different graphics card, you'll have different disk or processor or whatever the case it is, and sometimes you need to replace things on the fly without having to reboot. So that installs that. When we go via the website and we want to run one of these Snap based solutions, when you click on, for example, a browser link, and it says, where do you want this to open? It needs a way of communicating from the browser to Snap. And so we have this snap.d, which is snapdaemon.socket. and this is just turning this on, and this is the background service. So whenever you click on something to install, it will prompt up, and then you will be able to install it, and then in the background Snap daemon will start installing it for you, pull it down and install it onto your machine without you having to. And as part of that, now we have the ability to install these various applications. I like to install Chrome, or Chromium, which is its techie name. And the reason why I install this is it's got a built-in password manager on there, which is fantastic. So if you've got 200 passwords or 500 passwords, it gives a good, when you sign in, it gives the ability to auto-fill this stuff in for you, which is fantastic. And it also suggests strong passwords for you, so you don't have to remember it, and you're always secure, which is great. As we're using Outlook, as I'm using Outlook at the moment for one of my various endeavors, I am installing Prospect Mail, and this gives me the ability to read Outlook Mail. Basically, it's a frame that is connected to Outlook Web Access, but it allows me to easily use it without having to install a full client on this machine. Then we have the Microsoft Office equivalent. So we have Writer and Impress, Writer being Word equivalent and Impress being graphics equivalent. And I mentioned that earlier, maybe that shouldn't be there. And then we install a Git client. This is a nice graphical client that we've got there, where it allows you to easily commit, add, and push pull based code from a Git repository. Then we have Atom. Atom is a wonderful tool which you can see here. I've got it here where I am using it for my scripting, which you can see there. So as part of this scripting, you've got highlighting, you've got autocomplete, and you can set it for various things. And you can see on the right here that I've got GitHub enabled as well. I use, as I'm doing a PhD at the moment, using a reference manager called Zotero, which relies on Java. In the background, lots of Linux-based applications rely on Java 1.8, which is part of the install. So having this running in the background, you also can install a Chrome plugin and also LibreOffice plugins. So it's going to be very quick for you to reference scientific articles and be able to easily put them into your solution, into your Word document if you're writing some sort of paper. If you are using VPN, virtual private connection, sometimes you need to connect somewhere securely. This is in edge mode, so various different types of applications can be in different states. For example, you can have a stable state where those that release the software know that it is fully stable, and then you've got edge, where it's guaranteed to have bugs in because it's not been tested that much, but sometimes it's the only way to get access to certain bits of software. But it's their way of stating that it is in beta of some kind, or even alpha. So an alpha means that it has been not tested much. Beta means it's tested more, and you kind of get the idea along the way. So cross-platform scripting. This is PowerShell. So image editing, we can have GIMP, which is quite good, and Linux has a different way of doing print screens. You can have print screen, which writes straight to the disk, or you can hold down Shift and press print screen, and then it goes into the clipboard. Then you can paste it into another applications. But it's quite interesting. There's 4 different ways of making an image available. Yes, so you've got PowerShell. The scripting I've done on here is in Bash, and I believe there are add-ons to make this work in Windows. But because I come from a Microsoft background, I can tend to use PowerShell as well. And that allows me to run something the implementations, one that could be done on Microsoft platforms, you'll be calling that in the same way as you would in the Linux. So in theory, whatever you write, that should work on both types of platform along the way. But sometimes it doesn't, and it's good to know what it's relevant. So we're going to jump down to here for a second, cuda. Cuda, when you're running Linux, by default you've got this thing called the Nouvelle driver, which is a generic driver. It doesn't take advantage of the speed. If you're doing any kind of gaming or graphics, then you need to install the latest Vulkan driver, which I have pulled down at a later point. I'm not showing it in here, but normally the cuda drivers are not up to date compared to the ones that you want to use, and most of the time cuda doesn't work for most of the applications, but the generic NVIDIA based drivers do work. So that's good to know. So for example, I'm not using cuda at the moment. I'm just using the NVIDIA driver because it's more up to date than the cuda side. So we also, it's quite common nowadays, love this effect. OBS Studio is what I'm using here to do this various recording. You can do these cool effects here. What you can see here is that I've bound things popping up with keyboard shortcuts. Very cool. And then we may look at doing some mind mapping of some kind depending on what we're doing. So there's a very good mind mapping tool called MindMasters. So you would search for MindMaster and then you would download it. You would only download it and install this via this, run it as admin, use it's in the RPM format. Say we want to install this particular version, and normally there is name of software, version number, architecture, as I was saying, this 32 and 64-bit, and then that would install. And some of these packages you have to install it like this because they do not exist in the repository, for example. And sometimes if you're using the dev equivalent of Microsoft Office, you can have LibreOffice, and sometimes the files can get locked and it's possible to lock it out. And it brings me on to what you would be looking at, and this is thinking about cross-platform development. So I'm just loading up here what's called Qt Creator. So by default this will create the latest one of recording is version 6. It is absolutely huge, so do not install everything. You can be looking at 50 gigabytes and 3 hours of your day gone quite easily. So be very picky of what you are installing. And what this does in the background is when we try to create something, we can choose what kind of build system. CMake is the most common cross-built platform. So if I just run that, from here you've got a list of, you've got these CMake files. This is a fresh install, so ignore the errors, but you get the idea that on each one of these platforms you've got a what's called as a CMake file, and these CMake files will know what to do if you follow in the instructions and use a classic C or make based tool. Then when you run CMake, if you run it on Windows and you run it on Linux, it should work for you. That's if you're following the rules. If you do not follow the rules correctly, then you'll discover that it will not work for you. So I thought this would be interesting for you. So I'd be interested to see what you thought. Maybe you'd like or share, or maybe ask some other questions about what you would like to see. Because at the moment I'm doing development across some Linux and some Windows, and I'm just starting to work on Vulkan based technology. So that's going to be interesting. I'll tell you what that is at another time.